And again, the 80s were a very strange time, very bad time for science. I remember Reagan and this idea that we're not going to fund much basic science anymore. We're going to fund applied science. That was his major mandate, was applied science. Well, applied science requires basic science to keep feeding it stuff it can apply. Okay, after a while, you kind of run out.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. On this episode, I've got a special guest who's an expert on radiation policy and nuclear energy, and I'd like to chat a little bit about the science behind nuclear energy and maybe some of the misconceptions that the public has and that many of the environmental groups have built up over the years and have shared with the public. As always, if you enjoy what you're hearing, please press like on your podcast app, share it with your friends, and if you want to dig in behind the surface, talk to the experts, ask questions about the podcast, come and join us on Facebook /groups/TheRationalView. Geochemist and energy scientist, speaker, and author Dr. James Conca is senior scientist for UFA Ventures Incorporated in the Tri-Cities, Washington, an adjunct professor at Washington State University in the School of the Environment, a trustee of the Herbert M. Parker Foundation, an affiliate scientist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and a science contributor to Forbes on energy and nuclear issues. Dr. Conca, welcome to The Rational View.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Al.
And thank you for coming on. That's quite a resume. Could you tell me a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Well, it's been interesting. I started out as a planetary scientist, actually.
Oh, interesting.
In the 70s at Brown University. So origin of life, planetary science, planetary geology, that kind of thing. And eventually I went to Caltech for a PhD, worked at JPL, my first job, and went to the Antarctic because that is the most like Mars on Earth, although it's a little bit too warm and a little bit too wet, but that's
a little bit too much air.
It's as good as it gets. Yeah. And so while I was down there the second time, unfortunately, the Challenger blew up.
Oh.
Just as I was setting up radar reflectors for the Challenger to position itself in space within 10 feet. That was way before GPS. But so a lot of us youngins had to find new jobs and went into nuclear. It's kind of funny because many of us in planetary science went into nuclear because it's another outside the box kind of subject. And it's actually perfect. It's, there's a lot of similarities in terms of planetary science and astrophysics and things like that and nuclear. So it just worked really well.
Planetary science in the 70s. Then, were you involved at all in the Voyager project, or were you inspired by that work?
Yeah. Oh, yes. And in fact, I went down to Goddard to look at the images as they were first coming in, trying to interpret them.
Wow.
And be on the phone with the planetary scientists back at Brown.
That must have been something.
So it was actually quite exciting. And then Viking as well. So my planets were the icy satellites, especially Ganymede around Jupiter, and Mars. So those are my two expert pieces in planetary science. So it's kind of neat. So anyway, so then we was postdocing at ASU and met Judith, my spouse and colleague, also a geochemist. And we both got jobs up at Pacific Northwest Laboratory up here at Hanford site, and then went to WSU Tri-Cities, and then Los Alamos, and then down to WIP, which is our only deep geologic nuclear repository that actually is working. People don't really know much about it, but it's brilliant. It's in the right rock, and it works because it's in the right rock.
It exists.
So, we've already disposed of more nuclear waste than ever was destined for Yucca Mountain total.
That's amazing.
It's a little bit different. It's bomb waste. It's bomb waste instead of commercial waste.
Right.
But that's okay. It doesn't really matter what the waste is. So anyway, so that's kind of neat. Then came back to Hanford up here at Tri-Cities because the grandkids were here in 2010. And then ran the low-level rad labs out at the site for a few years until they closed down, and then kind of retired.
Okay. So
and then started writing for Forbes.
Yeah, that's
interesting.
Quite prestigious.
Kind of bizarre. Yeah, it was kind of neat and different because scientists are not told to write like that. And after the first one I did, one of the editors said, "Jim, you sound like Wikipedia. Could you get an attitude?" And I went, "Oh, okay." Scientists had some,
so what do you see as what have you had to change to write for Forbes from your scientific background? You
have to get an attitude. Okay, and because it's more of an op-ed kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm a little bit more scientific than most, because I'm a scientist and I want to educate. That kind
sure.
Of thing. But yeah, so you have to be a little bit more interesting than most scientific subjects that are interesting only to those in that field. So the whole point of this, and the reason I'm a trustee for the Herbert M. Parker Foundation, is education. So at this point, the public is woefully misinformed about issues like nuclear and other things related to it. And so, you got to bring them up, because that level of ignorance is dangerous in a society.
Indeed. And we're seeing the fruits of that in a lot of cases. But just delving a little bit more into your background, because I find it very interesting, and it's similar to some of the things that I've been doing in Planetary Science.
Neat.
On your website, you said that you were involved in radiobiology and shielding for space colonies. Right. I actually co-authored a study with the Canadian Space Agency on building a greenhouse on the moon, so I did a little bit of work in that as well.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, so I looked at things like, rock types on the moon, like ilmenite, which is titanium iron ore, mm-hmm. Which is rather plentiful compared to most anything else except anorthosite and basalt. So looking at different, and gabbros, so looking at different rock types, looking at their shielding effectiveness to gamma, and just looking at straight death of bacteria, behind the shielding, that kind of thing. So it was pretty simplistic, but it was the 70s. So that's okay. And of course, as you'd expect, ilmenite is the better one because it's higher Z. Has a lot of titanium and iron in it. Yeah.
Using the regolith for shielding effectively.
Yeah. So you just dig down, and if you dig down deep enough, there's very little that cosmic rays would be coming parallel to the walls, and so you get quite a bit of shielding. And you have to go down a fair amount, but not too far. 50 feet, 60 feet, you get pretty good shielding.
One of the biggest risks, I guess, of putting astronauts in space is the radiation dose that they might get. Do you know what the guidelines are from NASA right now for astronauts in future space habitat?
They're not really there. The last I saw, they were considering 10 rem per total dose. So 10 rem per year or 10 rem. As opposed to nuclear workers on Earth that can get up to 5 rem a year. And of course, 5 and 10 rem are nothing. I mean, mm-hmm. regulatorily they sound like a lot, but in terms of actual health effects, no one ever's had any health effect from 10 rem. There are some places on the Earth, their background radiation is 10 rem.
What's that in sieverts?
No increased. 0.1 sieverts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because a round trip to Mars, I think they're calculating something like 1 or 2 sieverts in a round trip 2-year program, right?
Right. So 2 years, yeah. So that would be pretty high to Mars. That's why you actually need a nuclear-powered rocket, not a chemical-powered rocket, to get to Mars, because it cuts the travel time in like a quarter. So now you're getting back to normal doses that you don't really have a problem with. And then, talking about putting water shielding, because cosmic rays, solar rays, I mean, those are high energy stuff.
Yeah.
High energy gamma, high energy neutrons, stuff like that. So shielding isn't all that effective against that, like we do just normally with gamma. 1 MeV or that level of gamma on Earth is easily shielded, but on really high energy stuff is not.
So you specialize in geologic disposal of nuclear waste, and as you say, you worked at the WIP facility.
Right. And I worked on Yucca Mountain for 25 years. So I'm one of the original authors of the license application to NRC. Very proud of it. It's a lousy rock. Yucca Mountain is just a lousy rock. And, but we learned a lot from that program. And although most people, you probably heard most people say, oh, we wasted $12 billion. No, we didn't. Okay. 10 billion of that 12 billion, we learned for everything. Doesn't matter where you put it. So things like transportation, corrosion, cask development, computer modeling, very, very important, of subsurface flow. So you can actually model how well the repository works over time. All of that doesn't matter where you put the repository. That was all very useful stuff, and we needed to learn that. We only wasted about $2 billion, which sounds like a lot, but over 30 years, I mean, that's really not very much. So, so that's kind of, where it is. Now, WIP was, of course, much cheaper because it's the right rock. So it didn't require all these engineered barriers that Yucca Mountain required to engineer around the fact that you picked the wrong rock. And Yucca Mountain was totally political anyway. It was chosen for political reasons, not for scientific reasons.
So it was a poor choice scientifically. It was a political.
Oh yeah, it was second to the worst one. You're pretty hard pressed to pick a worse place.
Is it just because it's not in anyone's backyard, or very is out in the middle of nowhere?
No, most of the places were basically out in the middle of nowhere. And that's kind of funny. I mean, there are 7 criteria we use to determine whether a place is good. Okay, one is a simple geology. You need to know the geology. If it's so complex that you can't understand it, then this is not a good place to put it. A simple hydrogeology, so how the water is moving through the subsurface. It should not be so complicated that you can't figure it out, easily.
Right.
Okay, so it has to be has to be a tectonically interpretable area. Okay. Now that's important. Yeah, you need to know where the faults are. You need to know where the falls are. You need to know where it sits in the plate, intraplate or a plate boundary or whatever. You need to know that, because that's really the most important aspect of placement is the tectonic situation. Then you need to choose a rock that doesn't need a lot of engineering. I mean, the whole point of choosing a rock is that, I like the pyramids. Pyramids are great, love them, but we don't build things that last a million years. Okay, so the Earth does, however. The Earth makes things that last millions or billions of years. So you pick a rock that is suitable, that has been formed naturally by the Earth, and it has all the properties you want. It's impermeable or relatively impermeable. It's the right redox. It's the right chemistry, all that kind of thing. And that's where you put it. Okay. So you shouldn't pick a rock that you have to engineer now, huge amounts in order to make it work.
Sure.
And in terms of being in the middle of nowhere, there's a rule that's, colloquially called the Walmart rule, insofar as there has to be a Walmart within an hour's drive. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding.
I like that rule. I don't understand it, but it's great.
Put more succinct, or put more technically, it has to have the socio-economic ability to support a small population. Because you can't ask people to live and work in a place that can't support them. I mean, again, so you have to be a Walmart within an hour's drive. You can't have to drive 5 hours to find a Walmart. Okay, so it can't be in the middle of nowhere, and it has to be a little town, like WIP has Carlsbad, and Yucca Mountain had Pahrump. So, you can live there, because you can't ask people, and this would take a fair workforce, like 1,000 people. You can't ask them to go live in tents and, things, and have no society nearby.
Sure.
So again, but it's very, very important. People do not kind of think of that at all, but it's incredibly important. And having worked at all these places, I know it, because people gripe about they're not close enough to civilization, but that's a sacrifice for the workforce. They have to be far away, but there needs to be some place that they can live and enjoy. So, yeah, it's called the Walmart rule.
So,
it's kind of funny.
Are there good places to do this? Have you identified reasonable substitutes for Yucca Mountain? I guess the WIP is getting close to retirement, isn't it?
Well, not really. I mean, that's all of this stuff is bureaucratic. Okay, WIP was chosen. The salt. See, the WIP is in what's called the Salado Formation. It's a beautifully massive, 2,000 foot thick, 10,000 square mile formation that is ideal for this. Absolutely ideal. There's no rock that is better. Now, there's other salts, because salt is massive, and at depth, at like a half-mile depth, it creeps closed. Okay? It has a self-healing property that cannot sustain an opening, or a pore space, or a fracture, or anything. So very quickly, 10 years, 15 years, it crushes down. It's, nature's big trash compactor. It's kind of funny, but it cannot sustain an opening. And that's why it's perfect. That's why you can still find 250 million year old seawater stuck in it. Okay. This is where you want to put something, where it is so isolated that you just are given 200 million years of performance. You don't have to work for it. You're simply given it. At Yucca Mountain, we had to work for 10,000 years. I mean, okay, we need bentonite. Oh, no, bentonite's not going to work. Okay, we need, titanium drip shields and all this nonsense because it's the wrong rock and the wrong chemistry.
I see. So you're not too fussed that they've decided not to continue with Yucca Mountain at this point. You agree with that?
I was overjoyed. Absolutely overjoyed.
Interesting. Okay.
It's stupid. It's just a stupid place. And because you have to engineer so much to fix it, the cost increased by a factor of 10.
Yes.
It was supposed to cost 30 billion. Okay. Then it was up to 90. Then it was up to 200. Now it's up to 300 or 400. And last count, it could be $600 billion because you picked the wrong rock. So that's absurd. Okay. WIP is the right rock. Don't have to do anything to it. It's giving you everything you need right there. And that's why WIP is so cheap and is performed so well. Now, in 1957, I could go on like this forever, by the way, so you have to kind of rate me.
No, this is very interesting. I'm learning a lot.
Yeah, it's quite neat. So in 1957, the first nuclear power plant opened at Shippingport, right? So, and we had been making bombs for almost 10 years. Or about 10 years.
Yep. So
the Atomic Energy Commission, which is the predecessor to DOE and NRC, approached the National Academy of Science and said, listen, we're building up this weird stuff called nuclear waste. We need to do something with it eventually. What do you recommend? And they recommended WIP. Basically, that was it. I mean, they didn't call it WIP or anything, but they said, the Permian salt. Permian salt, absolutely brilliant. It probably took them a half hour around a lunch table to figure that out because every geologist knows massive salt, not bedded salt, not salt diapirs, salt domes, but bedded massive salt. Okay, and we have a lot of that. We have 100,000 miles of it. The best one is the Salado Formation in southeast New Mexico, West Texas, in what's called the Delaware Subbasin, where it's absolutely ideal. I mean, you couldn't find a better rock, a better place. And we don't have much nuclear waste to start with. I mean, all the nuclear waste in the world ever produced in history would fit in that one repository. You don't need, 2, 3, 4, or 5 repositories. I mean, you only need one.
Okay.
Now, each country maybe wants one. Maybe France should have its own. Russia should have. So we have its own.
The Finns have one.
There are countries. Yeah, and the Finns have one, and the Swedes, but they don't really have that much waste. And so the idea that you're going to spend billions of dollars building a repository for a few reactors is insane. I mean, that's insane. So there is a group in Europe called the Arias group that is got 14 countries together who have only a few reactors, and they said, we need one place for all of us. We don't need 14 repositories for a few reactor waste.
That makes sense.
So that makes sense. So there should only be a couple in the world, a few. But in fact, I'm of the mind that the United States should open up a salt repository, take everyone's waste. It's only one repository worth. I mean, all the nuclear waste in the world would fit in one soccer field. So why in the world would you not do that? Okay, so,
I guess people would be worried about the cost of transporting it and the risk of sending it across the ocean. No risk.
We've been doing that, by the way, a lot. People don't know that. We ship nuclear waste around the world all the time. from England to Japan to France to Israel to all sorts of places. We ship this stuff and never have had a problem. And never have had a problem shipping it on land.
It's all the PR, though, isn't it?
Stuff. Oh, yeah, it's all PR. And that's okay. And I like to say, everyone's so afraid of nuclear. It's all virtual fear. because nothing has actually happened. I mean, yes, Chernobyl, I know. I mean, almost 100 people died. I know it was horrible, terrible, but not thousands. Not thousands. 3 Mile Island, nothing. It didn't even get past the outer wall. Fukushima, no one died from radiation. People died from fear. 1,600 people died from forced evacuation when they didn't need to be evacuated.
Yes.
And that's sad. That's one of those consequences of being afraid and being misinformed, is that you make the wrong decisions, and it's costly both in life and in treasure.
Yeah, that's the key aspect. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I started this podcast, was to, let's have some rational public policy people.
Right.
Let's cut through this fear. Let's get to the facts, and let's find out what we need as a society to make this work. To address climate change, we need to be building nuclear, maintaining nuclear, and we need to get over this unreasonable fear. So this is one of the 3 pillars of the anti-nuclear case. When you ever say we need more nuclear, they say, what about the waste? That's the main pillar. There's no solution to the waste. Yep. This is their talking point, right?
There is. Yep.
And you're saying that it's solved. It's a solved problem. We've done it. We're done.
Yep. Piece of cake. In fact, not only is it solved, it is easy. I mean, it is the easiest thing to do, is to dispose of nuclear waste. The safest, easiest thing there is.
In Canada, we're also discussing building a deep geologic repository, and there's a lot of discussion about the politics of it and getting the politicians on side. There's also a lot of discussion about native land rights in the areas that they've chosen to put this, and the need to get buy-in from the peoples, that the original peoples of those areas, is a big thing, right? In the past, people just dumped stuff on their land, and now you need to be socially responsible, and you need to make sure that they have buy-in. But unfortunately, they're not cohesive as a whole.
Right.
And you're going to get one group is going to buy in, and another group is going to be opposing it, and it ends up being an endless loop of bidding for people's land.
Yeah, I mean, and nowadays we can't seem to make national decisions. It's so many little interest groups. The states are all up or down or whatever. We can't have a national consensus because we've kind of lost the ability to trust scientists. Now, unfortunately, scientists have no decision-making power. This is one of the things that's very funny. People think we do, but we don't. I mean, you give us a problem, we answer it. Maybe it takes years to answer it, but we answer it. And then if you don't like it, you can ignore it. And that happens all the time. I mean, it doesn't make me feel bad anymore. I'm over it. But that's pretty much it. And so it's sad because then, again, the politics, and not even the economics, but sometimes economics, but the politics just gets in the way of everything, and it makes the decision. So Yucca Mountain was decided because Jim Wright was Speaker of the House in 1987 from Texas. That's why Yucca Mountain is Yucca Mountain.
Jeez.
That's the only reason it is. And so, and Tom Foley from Washington State, where I am, I remember him well, he was House Majority Leader. So it wasn't going to be in Washington. It wasn't going to be in Texas. All the powerful Eastern politicians got rid of all those sites in the East, and it came down to, Yucca Mountain. And there was this new junior named Harry Reid, just got elected, and they said, Harry, it's yours. And then that was it. So,
wow.
Very funny.
So many decisions, and major decisions are made in that way. I was just reading an article on the shutdown of Indian Point, and how it was basically 3 people in the room were responsible for that decision. There was Cuomo, there was Riverkeeper, and there was the company that wanted to get out. And that was it. Yeah. The whole policy of New York's energy basis is out the window now because these 3 people didn't like it.
Yeah, and it's going to be replaced by natural gas, of course, not renewables. Or they're going to try to buy hydro from Quebec, but that's going to go away soon. Quebec likes its own hydro, and New England, as well as New York, is vying for, because every time you close a nuclear power plant, like New York, New England, New Hampshire, Vermont, every time you do that, it's replaced by natural gas, or you start importing hydro from Canada. Well, that doesn't work that long. And so, so now New York and New England have problems because they cannot depend on energy coming from certain sources. So when things get tough, when you get another polar vortex, nuclear is the one that works the best for polar vortices. I mean, it's just amazing how well it works. It just can blow it off like it's nothing. In fact, it works better the colder it is. Nuclear works better, produces more energy the colder it is, because the temperature difference between the core and the outside temperature drives the
efficiency.
Cycle. So, yeah, that's the efficiency. So it's kind of funny. So now they lost a lot, and that's really sad.
Yeah, I get the feeling that there's a lot of push to build renewable. Renewable is free energy, they're saying, but these people that are saying that aren't calculating the cost of integrating it to the grid and having a reliable 24/7 source of power.
Yeah. And
this is going to come home to roost in a lot of places, I think.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a free lunch. I mean, everyone knows that. Kurt Vonnegut said that a long time ago, and it's true. So California is experiencing that. That's why their electricity rates have gone up, skyrocketed, because they put in so much renewables that they don't have the backup for it. And so that's what the reason for the brownouts and blackouts last year. Very key. And now they're going to close Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant for no reason, for political reasons.
The antis will say it's because it's on a fault line.
No, there's no fault near enough to matter. Also, we build nuclear power plants to withstand earthquakes. There has never been a nuclear power plant that's been harmed by an earthquake. Fukushima, nothing happened from the earthquake. Absolutely nothing. Okay, it was a tsunami. Yeah. And we had told Japan, I'm sorry to say, we told them for years that their seawall was crap, that their backup generation was crap, and they ignored us. So, okay, that's what you get. Now, in fact, NRC, our Nuclear Regulatory Commission, would never have even allowed them to open with that seawall. Absolutely wouldn't even let them open. So a strong regulatory agency like we have the strongest. Even though the antis don't like NRC, it is absolutely the strongest regulatory body in the world. They'll shut you down for nothing. For using the wrong colored ink, they'll shut you down. Because you're not supposed to use blue. You know that, right?
I didn't know.
It's kind of funny. Oh, yeah. I learned that in the DOE. Kind of funny. So, if you have a weak regulatory authority like Japan had, you're going to have problems. Okay. But, TEPCO should have known. But still, and that was, the biggest earthquake and the biggest tsunami in history for that region. And it's like, what do you expect? But even though there was radiation, didn't kill anyone, never will. There wasn't enough released. There was no one got enough of a dose. They didn't need to evacuate for 10 years. So they did it wrong. And then they shut down all their reactors. And then they imported coal and oil and natural gas to extreme measures. So that itself killed a bunch of people. They
killed more people shutting down their nuclear than were killed in the accident.
Than ever. Well, yeah, no one was killed in the accident from radiation. I mean, what do you call it? A big tower collapsed on someone. Okay, that had nothing to do with the radiation. And the tsunami swept 2 Fukushima workers out to sea when they died. But radiation didn't kill anyone at all. It never will. So, the one person they attributed later on was a smoker who didn't spend any real time at Fukushima, so there was absolutely no reason. But they wanted to find someone. So he died of cancer, but he was a smoker.
Yeah, so, the cancer timing was not nearly correct for the radiation from Fukushima to have caused it. The incubation time is much longer than what we saw in that case.
Yeah, it's called the latency period. There are for specific cancers that are caused by radiation. And not all are caused by radiation. I mean, you can't get stomach cancer from radiation. You can't get colon cancer from radiation. Okay, there are certain ones you can get. Leukemia. You can get thyroid cancer, but only if with iodine-131, which was not. All you have to do is not eat anything for 2 months, and then that's gone. And
you have other problems.
And so there are different latency periods. And so when somebody comes, when after Fukushima, I remember the antis, especially physicians for irresponsibility. They came up and said all these, thyroid cancers are caused by Fukushima, 5 months after Fukushima. It's like, what are you talking about? The latency period is like 4 to 10 years. And so, again, if you don't understand the science, which is complicated, there's no reason the public is going to understand this, then you're going to make stupid decisions.
Yeah, they don't understand statistics. They do poor studies. They ignore control cases, the bias from extra screening, all of that stuff. If you don't do it right, it's going to look scary. If you start searching for cancers, you're going to find cancers because cancers are common.
Right. But we've never, all this danger and fear, all I tell people is like, look around, where's all the people that died from nuclear? There's none. There's none. And so it is the safest form of energy there is. Even workplace injuries and, usual industrial stuff like falling off a ladder. The OSHA safety record of nuclear is better than any industry in history in the world. There is nothing that approaches it. It's safer to work in a nuclear power plant than to sit at a desk trading stocks in New York City. That's OSHA number. I'm not kidding. Just look up the OSHA number, and that's because no one who's trading stocks cares about safety. They don't. It's not commonplace. Whereas if you're in a nuclear power plant, safety is everything. In fact, the local one here is a new rule. You can't go up and down a stairway without holding a railing. If you're not holding a railing, you'll be fired. They're very serious about this kind of stuff.
This is part of the problem, isn't it, though? This is why there hasn't been a new reactor built in the USA in the last 30 years, right?
Yep.
This is why the cost has skyrocketed.
Right. That's another thing. The problem with cost, it doesn't matter whether you're building a nuclear power plant or the Golden Gate Bridge. If you're spending billions of dollars and you start and stop, your costs are going to go through the roof. If you change contractors after 2 or 3 years, like it happens all the time in DOE and stuff, then they have to come up to speed. All that just adds cost. That's why gas plants can be thrown up in a year. One, they don't take much steel or concrete or anything. They're just incredibly easy to put up. And then you can get them built in a year. And so there's no starting and stopping, and there's no laying off the workforce, and they're trying to hire them back later, and all this kind of stuff that nuclear is hurt with.
I can't believe the double standards between nuclear and gas or fossil fuels. Like, it seems like you don't need any regulatory requirement at all for fossil fuels, and they have a demonstrated impact on human health and mortality. You're killing hundreds of people as soon as you build a gas plant. You know it. You can't burn gas without killing people.
Yeah, and as a geologist, I know the oil field well. And, people die all the time on rigs. It's one of those very dangerous things. And, you just, push the body aside, hire a new one, lessons learned, and you move on. Now, if anyone dies in a nuclear power plant, which has not happened, by the way, if anyone dies in a nuclear power plant, the place would shut down and everyone would be up in arms, even if they just fell off scaffolding or something, which is the only thing that ever happens, breaks their neck. In fact, that happened about 7 years ago. That's the last death in the nuclear industry. Someone fell off scaffolding. Okay, that happens. And nothing to do with nuclear.
I think more people fall off windmills than fall off scaffolding in nuclear plants.
Yeah. No, the death rate, I call it the death print. I don't know if you've seen my stuff on that. The death print, if you normalize to, say, 1 trillion kilowatt hours of production of electricity, nuclear is less than 0.1 death per trillion kilowatt hours. Okay. Solar is 150. Wind is 440. Coal is 100,000 dead. Coal kills a lot of people every year, and China knows that. And then that's why they finally started to clean up their act. But they were killing about 200,000 people a year from coal.
China.
And now they're only killing 100,000 a year.
Wow, great job.
And that's great. Yeah,
that's
great
important.
job. We only kill 10,000. Okay. That's not very good, but hey, it's better than China.
So, should we be concentrating on new nuclear? I know there's a lot of news that Canada's politicians are pushing for funding
Yes.
new SMRs. People are talking about thorium. People are talking about breeders. Or should we just be building more Gen 3 uranium burning plants?
Okay. This is a very interesting question. First of all, the small modular ones are where you have to go. Okay. China's building big ones. South Korea is building big ones. Russia's building big ones. Other places building big ones. We're never going to build a big nuclear power plant again. And we shouldn't, pretty much, because of the issues we've been talking about. It's just, politically untenable. One of the weird things is that when you talk about small modular reactors, they're pretty much the same as big ones, except squeeze, skin down. So, they're the same technology as the big ones. NuScale out of Oregon, Corvallis, is the best one. It's the most farthest along in terms. It's been approved, and they're going to be starting building in a couple of years. The first one in Utah to load follow a bunch of wind farms. Very good. And that's, it took us a while to figure out that smaller is better. Okay. And so when you take the core and you shrink it down like a tenth of the size, then suddenly the surface area to volume ratio is such that the heat bleeds off quicker than it can build up. You cannot melt down. When you have a small core, you cannot melt down.
Okay, wow,
now,
that's
we've
important.
known this from, yes, it's incredibly important. So now it's easy to do the passive safety. All power goes out, all water disappears, and the thing just cools off. Okay. Now, we know this, we've known this forever anyway because of the nuclear navy. Nuclear navy is the unsung hero of nuclear power. They used to build small modular reactors. They have since 1950s. Okay. And there's never been a problem with them. Okay. And people, spend 6 months underwater living and working next to one. So what is the problem here? There's absolutely no problem. So we know that they work. The nice thing about being small and modular is now you can get around this building issues where you're on site and then protests stop you and then contractors replaced, all that nonsense, because you manufacture everything at a factory and then you ship everything to the site. You don't have to do much on site. So right there, that is a huge savings. And also when you talk to the public, you say small modular reactors, they like the idea because they like the idea of small. Because to them, big is bad and small is better, and okay, great. And if it can't melt down, even better. So I think we're with the small. That's where America's going towards.
It's mostly a political decision, I think, though, right? Because of the regulatory regimes and the status quo of the NRC and everything. Right.
Now the thing about the advanced reactors, the thorium and molten salt reactors and things like helium, is that the NRC has never approved one. Okay. They only know light water reactors. That's all they know. That's all they have the staff for. So if you're going to think you're going to get approved in 5 or 10 years, you're totally out to lunch because you'll have to submit something and then NRC will have to go hire staff that know that technology. And there's hardly anyone that knows that technology. So you add 5 to 10 years just by not being a light water reactor with uranium. Right? Do you see that?
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with technology.
Red tape.
It's just simply NRC doesn't know anything about it. So that's why NuScale and the other light water reactors, small modular reactors, they're the ones that will go first. And that's great.
The timeline, though, even then is not horribly exciting, right? We're looking at 10 years probably before they become commercial.
Well, the first commercial one, they will start building in 2023 in Utah.
Okay.
So we're talking a couple of years. And unless some political shenanigans stops it, but probably that'll go forward. I really hope it does.
Okay, well that's promising.
And we're pushing for one out here at Hanford to power the Hanford site. Because right now probably heard of the vitrification plant to try to vitrify old, sludgy, gross peanut butter-like texture defense waste, bomb waste.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's always
you need to solidify it
because they confuse that with reactor waste, and people have this idea of oozing barrels of reactor waste from The Simpsons.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's funny, but it's completely wrong. But the defense waste, again, more politics. We were ready to grout it because it likes to be in grout. Chemically, it loves to be in grout. And we have grout formulations where it would completely unleachable, high strength, perfect. Then, because France vitrifies their sludgy waste from reprocessing, suddenly the people here, especially the regulatory people, got it in their heads, we want to vitrify. Now, unlike France, this waste is the wrong chemistry for vitrifying. It doesn't like to be in glass. It hates to be in glass. So now you set yourself up to fail. So here's this vit plant that was supposed to be online and working, and it's 40 years behind schedule, and it's 10 times over budget because it's the wrong thing to do. But you can't get the state regulatory agency to buy off on grout because they love glass for no particular reason except France does it. Okay, so this is the kind of stuff that's going on.
I always imagine that this is done on purpose to hamstring nuclear industry.
Some of it is. Some of it is just bureaucratic incompetence. And again, the system is not set up for science to make any decision. It's just not set up for that.
Well, that's why you and me are talking to the media, right?
Yes. No, I love it. I love MSNBC and all that, but, during Fukushima and stuff, their nuclear experts were not scientists. They were anti-nuclear activists. And it's like, they're not nuclear specialists. I mean, they're not scientists. They didn't have one scientist on except Stephen Chu, the then Secretary of Energy, who didn't know anything about waste or energy, by the way.
They'll go straight to Greenpeace and their anti-nuclear friends. And that seems to be the problem. And these people just are totally biased against it seems, and they're just ignoring the evidence.
It's a religious fervor. I mean, it truly is a religious fervor. They have no interest in science. And again, that's, nuclear was one of the oldest examples of conspiracy theories. I mean, one of the oldest ones. And now, though, everything is rife with it. So, we have a huge anti-science push around the world, not just in the United States, but around the world, which is really sad because that's what made America great. I have to say this. What made us the richest, most powerful, best, civilization in the history of the planet was science and engineering. Mm-hmm. And so to suddenly become anti-science, to be anti-vax or anti-whatever, is insane. So it's like, wait a second, that's what made us great, And so this is counterproductive. It's also normal. This is what happens when a society reaches a pinnacle, and it's the greatest thing on earth. Then everyone relax, and you have the luxury to be stupid, and that's because you're the greatest.
So what's the solution?
So someone's going to
What should we be doing?
Education, but that's a long-term thing, right?
Yep.
You need science education in school more than it is. It was not bad when I was, in grade school and in, middle school and high school, 60s and 70s, but, it wasn't great. It was getting better, and then it kind of shifted. And again, the 80s were a very strange time, very bad time for science. I remember Reagan, and this idea that, we're not going to fund much basic science anymore. We're going to fund applied science. That was his major mandate, was applied science. Well, applied science requires basic science to keep feeding it stuff it can apply. Okay. After a while, you kind of run out of stuff if you're not funding basic science. And so in order to get funded, NSF or even any, DOE, anything, EPA, NASA, you had to have an application. Even though you knew you'd never get to that application, who cares? I mean, this is the science we need to do. And so that rose beyond belief in the 80s and continues on.
Yeah, at the end of your grant proposal, you have to shoot down a rocket or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think anybody believed that was going to happen. And I remember Star Wars, Reagan's big Star Wars thing where they were going to use lasers to shoot down all the ICBMs from Russia, and the technology just wasn't there. And it's like, okay.
Hey,
but laser
just
physics,
for the mirror
woo.
finish. right.
Got a lot of money.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I don't know if I love it, but
yeah. So anyway, that's why small modular reactors, because NuScale, the company I mentioned with the light water reactor that's already been approved, essentially they have a 12-pack. I love it. They call it a 12-pack, and a 12-pack of 12 modules hooked up. That's equivalent to a big reactor. That's about 800 megawatts. So yeah, each one is small, so each one can't melt down, but altogether you've got a big reactor, and that's fine. So that's great.
okay.
And also because of that, because you have 12 individual reactors, you can load follow renewables as well as natural gas. You can move things up and down. You can come online, offline. It's just amazing. You can load follow in seconds. In fact, there are 3 different ways of load following in seconds, minutes, hours, and days. Actually, 4 types. So you can adjust on the fly as whatever you need. Large reactors are a bit more difficult to do that. Not impossible, but more difficult.
Interesting. Yeah, I was talking with Ken and Brian of Terrestrial Energy a few podcasts back, and they're very gung-ho about their technology and moving forward as well. But it's the regulations of the over-the-top regulations are really a drag on getting things to market. And it's all based on the Alera principle, that as low as reasonably allowed or achievable.
Right.
Yeah.
As low as reasonably achievable, except for the reasonable is gone. It's as
what's
low as
reasonable
possibly
becomes
achievable.
unreasonable in the eyes of the public because the public is afraid. Yeah.
Right.
I see.
So you'd figure if you reduced any radiation to background, that would be good enough, right? I mean, background. No, that's not good enough. You have to be 100 times below background to be accepted. Now that's insane. That's just insane. And so that's why we can't do anything, because even waste disposals, you can't, you have to make sure that in the year 10,000, 100 times less dose is getting out of your repository than is in the background. Well, that's absurd.
Yeah, and it leads to very odd situations where, if you get something that's a little bit radioactive from, say, a coal industry thing, and they can just throw it in a dump. Right. But in a nuclear, if you move that piece of metal that's been irradiated from coal ash, you bring it into a nuclear place, they can't put it in the dump. They have to bury it in Yucca Mountain or wherever. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's rather insane. So we're still grappling with that.
We need to get the public behind this. We need to get. I mean, there's a lot of rational people out there. I don't think the public opposition to nuclear energy is that deep. I think it's very, very broad and shallow, because not a lot of people think about it. And
and all they hear are these horrible sound bites, and unfortunately, these difficult issues don't lend themselves well to sound bites. It's just you have to spend an hour, and who spends an hour? But I give these talks now, on nuclear waste and dirty bombs and all that kind of thing. And after that, the audience is just awed because they never really understood that. And of course, who would tell them? Who knows this stuff? But yeah, it takes that long. So that's why education is key. But education is long term. You just can't, open a fortune cookie and get the answer to nuclear.
So yeah, we're getting to the end of our time slot. Thank you so much for coming on the show. One last question for you. As a scientist, what's your favorite science fiction?
Oh, the Dosadi experiment. The Dosadi experiment by oh God, who wrote Dune? God,
Herbert.
I'm drawing a blank.
Hebert.
Yeah, Herbert.
Yeah.
It's one of the best ones. And then of course the Foundation trilogy, but it's dated.
No, that's a good one. I like that one.
That's a good one. But every time I reread it, I go, this is dated.
Thank you very much for the recommendation. I'll have to look into the Dasadi experiment.
Yes.
And thanks for coming on The Rational View.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's been fun.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/TheRationalView. Thanks for listening.